Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Epstein, and I'd like to welcome everyone here today. This past weekend, we suffered the worst terrorist attack since 9/11. Over 100 innocent Americans, our fellow countrymen, were either wounded or butchered in a deadly massacre. The underlying question remains as to whether the attack could have been prevented. Within hours, reports surfaced that Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen had been on the FBI's radar since 2013. Fingers are now pointing in the Bureau's direction, but I question whether the Bureau really is to blame. The facts presented by the panel today were evidence of far greater problem: widespread, systematic failures resulting from the implementation of questionable, if not subversive, policies. The panelists will include Philip Haney, who studied Arabic culture and language while working as a scientist in the Middle East, before being hired as a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security in 2003. After becoming an armed Customs and Border Patrol protection officer, he served 2 tours of duty at the National Targeting Center in Washington, D.C. Officer Haney was quickly promoted to his advanced targeting team. For more than 40 years, he has specialized in Islamic theology and the strategy and tactics of the global Islamic movement. Philip retired honorably in 2015 and has just released a compelling account of government malfeasance titled "See Something, Say Nothing." Art Moore, with a background in radio, newspaper, and magazine reporting, has both written and reported extensively on counterterrorism issues in the wake of 9/11. He is the co-author of "See Something, Say Nothing." William Ferry's government service spanned over 47 years, commencing with his military service as a member of the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division. In 2014, Mr. Ferry retired from the Department of Homeland Security, where he had served as their Assistant Director of Passenger Operations. In that capacity, he not only directed international inbound and outbound passenger and crew processing for the New York, New Jersey seaport, but 5 airports, and managed over 700 CBP managers, supervisors, officers, and civilian personnel. Joseph Schmitz, a former Inspector General for the Department of Defense, currently serves as a foreign policy advisor for Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Attorney Schmitz was Philip Haney's lawyer, representing him in a case brought on by the Department of Justice. Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, a former member of Congress who represented Minnesota's 6th congressional district, a post that she held for 4 consecutive terms. Representative Bachmann was a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Louis Gohmert, who's soon to arrive. Since 2005, U.S. Congressman Louis Gohmert has represented Texas's 1st congressional district. Representative Gohmert served in the United States Army Judge Advocates General Corps before being elected 3 times to the position of State District Judge for Texas's 7th Judicial District. Early summer 2012, Representatives Bachmann and Gohmert, along with 3 other members of Congress, penned letters to the Inspectors General of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State, outlining their serious national security concerns. Namely, the deep penetration of the U.S. government by Muslim Brotherhood operatives. They requested formal investigations into influence operations. Without further delay, please allow me to introduce my friend and colleague, Philip Haney, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm sure we all recognize we're at a turning point in history. Would we all agree with that? Yes. There's a reason why I'm here today, and that is my oath of office. And so as a reminder, I would like to read the very same oath of office that any of us who were or are active duty in either the military or law enforcement took. And so I'm going to recite it as I did in the day that I became a CBP officer in March of 2003. I, Philip B. Haney, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear the truth, the faith and allegiance of the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office to which I am about to enter, so help me God. And that's exactly what I did. In the course of that career with the Department of Homeland Security, excuse me, I happened to witness firsthand some of the most amazing events that have happened in our country's history since 9/11. Jeff mentioned that I had a background in the Middle East, that I was a scientist. I was an entomologist. I was a real original nerd. And what do nerds do? They collect everything, right? And they write everything down. That's a potent combination when you take a nerd and you turn him into a counterterrorism specialist, especially if he's an entomologist, because what do entomologists do? Especially me, I follow the trail and I find the nest. That is counterterrorism. Follow the trail, find the nest. And I'm going to walk you today through the case that I worked on regarding the Fort Pierce Mosque that's involved in the Orlando shooting, and I'm going to show you exactly how to connect the dots. And you're going to see that some of the explanations for what happened are well below minimally adequate in terms of the level of responsibility, and some of it reaches abrogation of duty in terms of our elected officials. And if you might be tempted to think that that's a bold statement, then I'm going to walk you right through the whole process, and you'll see you can come to your own conclusions about whether you agree with my premise or not. So to back up, I'm going to go through a little bit of history. In 2003, as I already mentioned, I was a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security. I was literally there from the very first day. I was already in federal service in what is called plant protection and quarantine. It's a small little tiny subgroup of the United States Department of Agriculture. But when DHS was formed in March of 2003, they pulled about 1,200 individuals into this new agency called DHS from agriculture, and I was one of them. But even before that, I made an attempt to join up because Max Cleland, our senator from Georgia, handwrote a letter to Tom Ridge inviting him to hire me in the new, what was called at the time, Office of Homeland Security. It was still in the White House. It didn't happen that way. I came into DHS another direction. But not very long after I became a founding member of Department of Homeland Security, I began to do what we call intelligence analysis. I was writing commentary on statements by Osama bin Laden, for example, and even as early as then I was talking about CARE. Well, I sent these memos up the chain of command, and eventually I got the attention of the higher-ups, and they sat me down and they said, "Mr. Haney, what are we going to do with you? You're not really just an agriculture officer, but you're not an armed officer either." So they had created a new branch of intelligence group, and they put me on that. And then they found out I took shorthand. So what do you suppose happened then? I became the note taker. So that was 2003. Then my first encounter, and this is where I come in contact with William Ferry, was an article that I wrote, which is still on the World Wide Web. You can go look it up today, called Green Tide Rising, Hamas Ascends. It was a before, now, and after, past, present, future, three-part analysis of what we could expect from Hamas there in the Gaza Strip. If you were to go back and look it up now, you would find that it seems like it might have been written 5 minutes ago, not 10 years ago. But somehow the CIA contractors that I was attending a class with decided that I could not have written an article like that unless I had unethically accessed classified information. They never asked me, how did I come to these conclusions? They just assumed, apparently, that I had breached protocol, and they turned me into headquarters. And that's how I met Bill Ferry. He was the collateral duty officer from Newark, New Jersey, who came down to investigate me. He interviewed everybody in my horizontal chain and everybody in my vertical chain of command. After 11 months, I was exonerated. To this day, and he may shed some light, there are factors and reasons in that investigation that still mystify me, because you must keep in mind that Hamas, at that point, was already a globally designated terrorist organization. So why would personnel from the Department of Homeland Security, founded to help protect our country from terrorism, investigate one of its own officers for writing about terrorism? 2008, November, is a turning point in the history of American counterterrorism efforts. It's called the Holy Land Foundation trial. November 2008. Keep that date in your mind, because every single thing that I talk about, actually all of us talk about today, that took place after November of 2008, by default, is a deliberate and intentional abrogation of minimal constitutionally mandated duty. Because why? It was proven in federal court that organizations, front groups from the Muslim Brotherhood Network in the United States, and specifically talking about Council on American Islamic Relations, called CARE, which has offices right here in Washington, the Islamic Society of North America, called ISNA, and the North American Islamic Trust, which is what is called in Arabic a waqf. It's a holding company that owns most of the mosques in the United States, NAIT. The original plan was to prosecute or at least take to court in phase 2 of the Holy Land trial. It never happened. But what did happen was that 5 individuals were indicted and found guilty on 102 charges of raising somewhere between $12 and $60 million for support of Hamas. It was irrefutably proven in federal court by the Department of Justice that CARE, ISNA, and NAIT had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and explicitly to Hamas. That has not changed from then to now, and every single one of those organizations are still functioning. In fact, not only are they merely functioning, but the leaders of those organizations were deliberately and intentionally brought into the administration to help promote and create both domestic and foreign policy, and this status continues to this very day. And that is one of the reasons why I ended up in such an overtly adversarial relationship with my own government and my own agency, because I had the audacity to have targeted those individuals and those organizations and put that information into the law enforcement system. That brought the U.S. government to a crisis. And that crisis is what? What are we going to do with the law enforcement information that's in the system? We call it derogatory information if we're trying to bring the leaders of these groups into a relationship with the government. You have 2 choices. Act on it from a law enforcement perspective and carry forward, or ignore it. But even ignoring it is simply a passive response. They didn't stop there. They became deliberate and intentional. And in 2009, what I call the first great purge, they ordered me to remove the linking information from all 850 records that I'd put into the system. Right exactly at the time when I was watching the C-SPAN hearings with the committees in Congress and expressing their concerns about the underwear bomber. And their 2 concerns were that failure to connect the dots and the radicalization of U.S. citizens and or lawful permanent residents. exactly what we saw in Orlando and in San Bernardino and in Chattanooga and in Fort Hood and in Boston. The very same thing that the Congress expressed so clearly they were concerned about is exactly what happened. Radicalization of U.S. citizens and or lawful permanent residents. We call them green card holders. That was the first Great Purge in 2009. They ordered me to modify, that was the word, it's a euphemism. And how many people here have been pulled over by a state trooper? He walks up to you and he says, I'm going to give you a ticket. But I'm not going to tell you why. I just pulled you over and I'm going to give you a ticket. You got to pay the fine. It's $100. But I'm not going to tell you why. That's not acceptable, is it? Well, in my case, when I put those records into the system, but there was no explanatory reason for why those records were in the system, my colleagues have no reason or no understanding of why I put the records in there in the first place. So they're going blind. Comes 211, what we call the second Great Purge. This is when you start to hear in the news people like Stephen Coughlin and Matthew Dooley and John Guandolo and Bill Gothrop, one or two special subject matter experts from each one of the major federal government law enforcement oriented agencies. They came after us first. They started from a top-down approach. They knocked off all the subject matter experts in each one of the agencies, and then they went forward with the next steps of their program, which eventually morphed into what we call countering violent extremism, or CVE, also known in foreign contexts as engagement and dialogue. They made the choice that rather than base counterterrorism on a fact-based law enforcement approach, they were going to begin a subjective approach based on engagement, discussions, community actions, etc., etc. And as we will show you in a minute, it has metastasized into a full-blown policy that was just published publicly, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. We come to 2012, right in the time of the Great Purge. FBI publishes a document called Guiding Principles, Touchstone Document on Training. It's available online. There's 3 sections to it. It's a 3-page document, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1, and I'll slightly paraphrase, says, even though an individual is affiliated with a known terrorist organization, you cannot assume that that individual is a terrorist himself. Now, you think that approach may have had some bearing on why the FBI announced that they opened a case on Mateen twice and had to close it because they couldn't find anything? Maybe that touchstone document had an influence on their approach vis-a-vis law enforcement. I'd say that the plausibility is very high. Then we come to things when they begin to really intensify. And that is in the year 2012 when I was working at the National Targeting Center, not far from here in Reston, on a case called the Tablighi Jamaat Initiative. Tablighi Jamaat is a group, a Salafi Sunni organization with between 75 and 125 million members worldwide. They are called the Party of the Promoters. They came here to the United States in groups of 3, 4, and 5, and they were abusing the visa waiver system. That's how we first noticed them. William Ferry and I broke one of the major early cases, and I suspect perhaps, though I don't know for sure, I don't think it's ever happened in the history of the Department of Homeland Security when the subject of an investigation ended up breaking a major case with the investigator. But that's exactly what happened. 4.5 years later, after he investigated me in the fall of 2006, and he'll explain more, we ended up working on a major case that became what I went to NTC for a couple years after that. And this also is when the State Department, you okay on time? Okay, should I go faster? No. We good? State Department came to the National Targeting Center, a group of 7 and 3 SESs, and had a meeting upstairs and said they had concerns about our focus on Tablighi Jamaat because it was not a designated terrorist organization. Therefore, in plain language, they said, you're violating their civil rights and civil liberties. Now, remember I told you I took shorthand? Well, I was the proverbial fly or ant on the wall. I wrote down everything they said. I never said a word the entire meeting, but I wrote down everything that they said. It wasn't recorded, except I recorded it. So I heard it firsthand, and then it was verified later on when Judicial Watch, thank God for them, FOIA'd my own case, because I was eventually investigated by 3 different branches of the federal government all at the same time, and one of them was the Inspector General, Department of Homeland Security. When I asked for the results of my own case, they told me point blank, you can't have it. You have to FOIA it. So Judicial Watch stepped up and they FOIA'd it for me. And we found, snuggled in some of the caches of documents, the emails going back and forth that told exactly why they shut down the Tablighi Jamaat case. They were going to take it in another direction, another euphemism, because of concerns over civil rights and civil liberties. Subsequently, I went back home to my home port and I created a component of the Tablighi Jamaat case called the Institute of Islamic Education. And if any of you have heard me speak in the public about the 67 deleted records, that's where that case came from. They went into the system. This time there was no euphemism. They just flat out deleted the entire case, all 67 records, with all the biometrics. That means passports, birth dates, parents, families, addresses, travel patterns, everything obliterated. And that was bad enough until December 2nd of 2015. What happened then? San Bernardino. And I was watching the news, as we all did, and all of a sudden a piece of information came across the screen. I was sitting in my little office and I sat up and yelled at the screen, "That's my case!" Because it was the Tablighi Jamaat. I knew it like that. And all of a sudden everything started happening in my head, because holy smokes, Batman, they deleted the records that tied directly to that case. What would have happened if we would have been allowed to continue forward working on that case? 2 plausible possibilities. Syed Farouk, the male who was the shooter, would have been denied permission to fly because he would have been associated with the derogatory organization. Number 2, his pending fiancée, Tashfeen Malik, would have been denied a visa and she never would have come into the country. Meanwhile, we found out subsequently there's a third way it would have been stopped. The man who provided the guns to Syed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik is in jail now. For what? Multiple failed plots with Syed Farouk. Hold on. Slow down. That's a plural. Obviously, they happened before he was killed. That means they knew. No one intervened. Just like Orlando. It gets better. Or worse. Okay, the news breaks about the shooting in Orlando a couple days ago. My colleague and I, Art, we have an RV. We're on a book tour. We're sitting in the RV, and I decided I'm going to go step by step through an investigation and connect the dots on this case, just like I used to when I was active duty, except for one caveat. I don't have classified information anymore. So I'm going to do this thing open source. So in order for me to verify or drive a stake into the ground for the beginning of the case, the first thing that I had to do was irrefutably verify that Omar Mir Siddiqui Mateen was in fact affiliated with the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce. We heard bits and pieces of it. So I gathered up all the open source information I could find, I laid it on the table, and I went after it. And I queried and I queried, and I finally found an article in the Palm Beach Post, a local paper, quoting the Imam, whose name is Shafiqur Rahman, that yes, indeed, Omar Mir Siddiqui Mateen was a member of this mosque. Now I have the stake in the ground. It's a solid, probable cause level piece of law enforcement information that you can build a case on top of, and it'll stand forever because it's on solid fact. So then what do you suppose I did? I went to the website of the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce. And lo and behold, what do I find right on their website? That they're directly affiliated with the Sharia Board of America. Well, right off there, there's a big, bright, blinking red light, because the word Sharia should be an immediate warning. Sharia law is illegal in the United States because it's in direct conflict with the U.S. Constitution. And yet we constantly hear from apologists and spokesmen that they have no intention of implementing Sharia law in the United States. Well, if that's the case, then why is the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce directly linked to a group called Sharia Board of America? Well, I can tell you why. Because their goal is to implement Sharia law in the United States. Next, I go to its founding or its parent organization called Rahmat-i-Alam Foundation. Rahmat-i-Alam means mercy to the world. I'm already in the Tablighi Jamaat case, and I know it because it's all up here in the old noodle. I can remember everything about the cases that I do. I'm starting to realize right now that this is going to be the second case that's tied directly, along with San Bernardino, to the case that the federal government shut down because of concerns about civil rights and civil liberties. So I go from Rahmat al-Alam clear up to Dar Uloom, Chicago. Does anybody remember the mosque's name in San Bernardino? Dar Uloom al-Islamiyah. Now I have a direct connection. There's the network. The thing in Orlando is like a radioactive spill from a nuclear power plant. It's part of a network that's spread across the entire United States. And this is one of the points I want to try to make. Every time we see an act of terrorism in the United States, the finger eventually always goes to ISIS. This network is not even Arabic. This is Indian subcontinent in origin. It's an entirely different branch, if you will, of a big tree. The notion that everything originates from ISIS is a false notion, and it will lull us into a sense of complacency that will get us hurt over and over and over again. There are more than one networks operating at the same time in the United States. Then from Dar Uloom, Chicago, I go right up to the Institute of Islamic Education. This is the case that I worked on with the 67 direct deleted records. And from there, one more step, and we're into the Tablighi Jamaat initiative. Now I have a direct, no-gap link all the way from the mosque in Fort Pierce all the way up to the case that I garnered 1,200 law enforcement actions from in 11 months, 100 a month, which is like 25 a week. Plus, I was given, as you will see in the book if you have looked at it, credit for finding 300 terrorists while I was working at the NTC on a TDY. How many terrorists were involved in this shooting in Orlando? One. How many in San Bernardino? Two, maybe three, depending on how you want to count it. How about Fort Hood? One. How about Chattanooga? One. How about Boston bombing? A couple, two or three maybe. Still waiting to see about that. How many did I get credit for? 300. That's right. So I broke this on Breitbart a couple days ago, and now things are blowing up. I don't criticize my law enforcement colleagues, but when Director Comey said that we had done all we had, my immediate question was, did you talk to CBP? When you conducted your investigations on the ground of Mateen, did you share any of the information with CBP so that they would know if he traveled and he was coming back and forth, they can collect more data for you? Or on the other hand, did CBP ever know that he was being investigated by the FBI? Probably not. And the reason why is because we don't have reciprocity. We can't share information directly. It has to go through a liaison called the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF liaison. And that's the state of things where we are. But there's one more point. Does anybody recall what Mateen's father said about his son when the news started breaking? Just to paraphrase. Well, guess what we found out this morning? Senior Mateen is the vice president of the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce. which tells you now, and it proves my point all along, that this is a network of organizations. There's no such thing as a random act of violence any more than there is a random ant of violence, because ants live in colonies. And if you take an ant away from its fellow ants and put him in a little jar, he'll die within hours. As soon as you separate the ant from the colony, he just turns into a raisin and dies. He has to be within the environment. Same with the Islamic world. And let me finish up with the real nature of the threat. It's not jihad, it's Sharia. The reason we see jihad is a tactic. Sharia law is the strategy. And we're fighting tactics when we don't understand the strategy, and we are doomed to fail every time, because in shooting, those of you who shoot know you have to acquire the target and stay aimed in. What if the target is moving and you insist on firing at where the target was? You'll never hit anything. But what if you know where your target's going to end up in 10 minutes from now, over there in that corner? You wait. That's the difference between strategy and tactics. We will not be successful in defending our liberties and values till we comprehend the true nature of the gravitational force of Sharia law vis-a-vis the U.S. Constitution. It's not about our neighbors, it's not about prayer, it's not about freedom of religion, it's about Sharia law versus the Constitution. We need to shift the narrative, take the remote away and say we're not going to watch that channel anymore, we're going to watch this channel. This is the U.S. Constitution channel right there. It's staying on that, period. And if we evaluate everything on that basis, including the upcoming elections, ask yourself who is more likely to stand up for the values of the U.S. Constitution. That's the basis that you should use in evaluating not only presidential candidates, but every other part of our society too. We need to have a secular revival and go back to the U.S. Constitution. As in a matter of fact, we need to have a spiritual revival to upgrade our own integrity. Because it's absolutely impossible that if I had taken that vow and I didn't have personal integrity after being investigated 9 times, what do you think would have happened to me? I would have been dead meat a long time ago. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Philip. Anyway, at this point, I'd like to introduce Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. My name is Michelle Bachmann. I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this press conference. And I played a role in this story, and I was thrilled to be able to write the foreword for Phil and Art's book. This is a very important book, and it is a heartbreaking day that we are here today, because I believe in part what Phil has told all of you is that he was on track to put very important information in front of law enforcement's face, information that would allow them to crack the code, if you will, to understand and to be able to defeat networks here in the United States that wanted to bring about violent acts against American citizens or against American targets. And I think, again, it's important to underscore what was the ultimate goal and what is the ultimate goal around the world globally, not just here in the United States. The ultimate goal is the establishment of Islamic Sharia law around the world. That includes the United States. It is hard for us to understand or believe, growing up in the United States, that someone would seek to overthrow the United States Constitution and in its place put a series of laws known as Islamic law, Sharia law, in its place, and force, even through violence, all people to have to follow someone's interpretation of Islamic law. But that's exactly what the goal is. The fellow that committed the horrific acts on Sunday morning had that as his goal. The individuals who shot the 14 innocent people in San Bernardino had that as their goal. People across the globe who are acting in the name of Allah are trying to bring about the same goal, the establishment of Sharia law across the globe. Philip had mentioned a document known as the, why can't I say it? Yeah, the Touchstone document, which talks about civilization jihad here in the United States. There are various means that that those that are trying to establish a global caliphate or Islamic Sharia law across the globe are trying to use. In some cases, it's through immigration. In some cases, it's through violence. In some cases, it's through taking over institutions. I was working as a member of the United States Congress. My function is to provide oversight over various committees. I sat on Financial Services Committee, and then I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the Intelligence Committee. The Intelligence Committee is one of the smallest committees in Congress by design. We deal with the classified secrets of our nation. Almost all of our work is done behind closed doors for obvious reasons. It is not televised. During the course of that work, I saw how crucial this work was. And I also saw that at about the same time that I was coming on this committee, there was a rapid increase in the amount of terrorism across the globe, but also threats here in the United States. And I felt I needed to learn more than what was just coming and being presented to me by the committee. Because I had a sense, maybe I'm wrong, I had a sense that the departments that were coming to present information to us before the committee were perhaps in some sense sanitizing some of the information, and perhaps we weren't getting the whole story as members of Congress. Because one thing I have learned being in government is that bureaucracies and individuals in government want to make themselves look good, especially before those who are tasked with holding them accountable. So I had asked one of my aides to find me important people or people who are in the know who could bring me information. Hence walks in Philip Haney. One of my aides brought Philip Haney to me and said, Philip has a very important story to tell you. And really, I think the cover for this book says it all, which is see something, say nothing. Because what Phil Haney did, and what I tried to do, and I'm a cog in the wheel, Phil is a cog in the wheel. We both believe very strongly in the United States Constitution. He took his oath of office extremely seriously, and he did right by his oath of office. He did right by the Constitution. He did what we want 100,000 federal employees to do, to act in accordance with his job description and keep the American people safe. He did it. He fulfilled his job. I tried to do the same as a member of Congress. I was very serious when I took my oath of office. I believe in our country, in our Constitution, and I tried to fulfill that level of oversight. So when he saw something, he tried to say something. When I saw something, I tried to say something. When Phil tried to say something, he was punished for it. He was punished with investigations being opened up on him, not on connecting the dots against terrorists and terrorist activities, but against Phil Haney, the person who unbelievably, with the gift that God has given him, where he put the trails together to get to the nest, the investigations were opened up on him. I want to give you a couple examples in my own life working with Phil Haney. Phil brought up the fact that I had authored letters to various inspectors general in our government, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, various departments. That is true. The reason why is because evidence was brought to me specifically about the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States government. The Muslim Brotherhood has been designated a foreign terrorist organization by the United Kingdom, by the United Arab Emirates, by other nations across the world. All you have to do is look at the Muslim Brotherhood, their history, what they stand for, and it's clear to see They are a foreign terrorist organization. In fact, I authored legislation here in the United States to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization. And so I authored the letters. I found 4 other members of Congress, including Representative Louis Gohmert, who signed onto my legislation, or onto my letters to the inspectors general. And we asked questions very specifically about individuals and about people who were being involved in our government who had more than questionable ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. One individual that I asked questions about is affiliated with then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, now the presumptive nominee for the Democrat Party. One of her chief aides was a woman named Huma Abedin. These were the facts that were brought to me. What I was told is that her mother and her father were both members of the Muslim Brotherhood. Her father was a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood, her mother being a member of the Muslim Sisterhood, her brother being a close personal friend with Qaradawi, who is the spiritual leader for the Muslim Brotherhood. Also, her parents were involved in a magazine, essentially what I was told was a propaganda organ that was seeking to establish and promote the establishment of Islamic Sharia law across the globe. This magazine, I was told by the facts brought to me, in part was funded by a man named Omar Nassif, who was also a financer for Osama bin Laden. He had financed terrorism. He was financing this Sharia publication. This was Huma Abedin's parents who were writing this magazine. During the time that Huma Abedin, I was told, was working for Mrs. Clinton while she was the First Lady, also while she was United States Senator, Huma Abedin's name was listed on the masthead as an associate editor of that magazine. Now, according to U.S. federal law, if a person has that kind of associations, they don't get a security clearance for obvious reasons. And so we as members of Congress did our duty, our oversight function. We asked questions of the Inspector General. Would you look into and find out how did Huma Abedin get her security clearance? Was she granted a waiver? How did it happen? Because according to federal law, that shouldn't have happened. We never even got the courtesy of a response from the Inspector Generals to our letters. Philip Haney wrote about that in his book. That isn't the only example. Philip Haney also wrote about the Tsarnaev brothers in his book. As you know, that was another tragedy that occurred in Boston. And they attended an Islamic mosque in the Boston area. I served on the Intelligence Committee at that time as well. When that happened, I took a trip to Moscow. And I went to Moscow for the purpose of meeting with colleagues there, our own individuals who were there. But I also wanted to find out more information because there was a link with the Tsarnaev brothers and also with that part of the world. During the course of that meeting, I had understood that a cable had been sent from Russia to the United States Intelligence Service warning us of the Tsarnaev brothers and that we should look into them. When I was there, I asked them to read the cable to me. They put it in my hands, but I don't read Russian Cyrillic, so they read it to me. It was brought back to the United States at my request in a diplomatic pouch. It was translated into English. It was read again here, and I questioned the FBI. Did you question the Tsarnaev brothers? Did you question people about these individuals? Or did you question these individuals and people who knew them? Because as you know, the FBI closed that investigation in a very similar fashion to the way that they closed the investigation into the Orlando killer. And I wanted to know, why did you close that investigation? I asked them, did you surveil the mosque that the Tsarnaev brothers attended? No, they did not surveil that mosque. I asked if they talked with the imam, the people at the mosque. No, they did not. They told me that they do not do that. The reason why I bring that up is because it was very clear that a very different view of national security is being adopted now in our country. And it is a view that is getting innocent American people killed, and it has to stop. We have to change course, and we have to open our eyes, and we have to believe in the reality that's in front of us. And we have to understand that the ideology, the ideas of Islamic supremacy are the motivation behind these killers, because their ultimate goal is to achieve Sharia law as the law of the land. And they are willing to kill innocent people because they believe that Sharia law allows them to do that to achieve their goal. I saw this myself as a member of Congress, that we were engaging in this foolish policy. We took Philip Haney. I believed him. He showed me PowerPoint presentations of the information that he had put together. I knew he was not a kook. I knew he was the real deal. I knew he was being shunned. I knew he wasn't being listened to. I had survived a national smear campaign of my own name when I went forward with these letters asking questions about the Muslim Brotherhood and their influence in our government. I was smeared for that. So I identified with and understood what Phil was going through. And so I tried to give credibility to Phil with my colleagues. I took him to committee chairs, to subcommittee chairs, so that he could share his story, so he could share his information, so they would know that he was being told to delete information that could put America in a situation where innocent people could get killed. I am sorry to say, not much was done with the information that Phil gave to them. This is a shame on our government. And we are standing today in a situation where we just saw this happen on Sunday in Orlando. On Monday, we saw what happened in Paris. We had heard from a reporter just a little bit earlier that there's a alleged Twitter feed that perhaps there's a shooter holding hostages right now in Amarillo, Texas. We don't know if that's true. It hasn't been confirmed. But this may continue. And I believe it will continue until we wake up and push back. This is a deadly policy that our current administration is engaging in, which is see something, say nothing. That is the administration's policy. Because if it has to do with Islamic ideology, boy, turn away. And the best example was this. I woke up on Sunday morning and saw what all of you saw on television with this story. And local law enforcement, the local mayor, and the FBI were all at the microphone talking about this tragedy. But who did the FBI introduce? They introduced the imam of the Central Florida Islamic Center. Now I ask you, the administration wants to have it two ways. On one hand, they want to say that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. If it has nothing to do with Islam, why do you have an imam up there that the FBI is introducing? And when the imam went to the microphone, his whole point of view was to say, let's not get too crazy here and jump to any conclusions. Let's just be calm. Well, there's no hordes running in the streets trying to hang Muslims right now. The American people are very constrained, I think, and very civilized in all of this. The American people want to live happy lives. They want to live quiet, peaceable lives. And so they aren't out doing mean things to Muslims, nor should they be. But the fact is, we have the wrong view of national security, a fatally flawed view of national security. Philip Haney knows that. He saw it. He did everything he could short of that, and it almost cost him his career by telling the truth. I did the same thing. I saw it. I went out on a limb, practically lost my seat in Congress over it. It didn't matter to me, because what mattered to me was protecting the American people and maintaining our national security. That's what's at stake right now. Are we going to wake up now when we've had the worst jihadist attack since 9/11, or are we going to believe the fantasy fiction of fantasy Islam that has been put out as official policy by this administration? I hope not. As a country, or as an administration, they have willfully blinded themselves from information. They have engaged in willful ignorance by ignoring the information that people like Philip Haney gave to them. And with all due respect, they have engaged in willful stupidity by creating a delusional fantasy view of Islam that doesn't exist. The real view of Islam, reading the Quran and the Hadith, calls for a global caliphate and the global domination of Sharia law and the use of violence to achieve that means. Let's wake up. Let's listen to the Phil Haneys of the world. Let's listen to the congressmen who see this and try to provide oversight rather than smearing them. Let's wake up and protect the innocent. That's what we're to do, and follow our Constitution. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Michelle, and you'll always be my Congresswoman. Next, I'd like to introduce Congressman Louis Gohmert.
Thank you. We're going to keep having press conferences over and over again. And when I say we, I'm talking about the government, because radical Islamists will continue to kill Americans. And what has become very, very clear is that the CVE advisory group, and now we know there is a subcommittee that Jay Johnson has started. And by the way, Jay Johnson is having a classified briefing at 3 p.m. to tell us about, in a classified setting, what happened in Orlando. And I'm telling you, I've listened to this man in classified briefings. And because they classify them, we can't tell about the things that they say that are not true in the classified briefings. But I can assure you, I learn a lot more from reading credible sources on the internet than I ever do at a classified briefing. Sometimes by the time they tell us things at a classified briefing, they've prepared their presentation a day in advance, and some of the things they tell us are already out of date and easily disprovable. But Jay Johnson took over from Janet Napolitano, who started this countering violent extremism group. And what their real job is, this isn't in the job description, but this is what it turns out they are doing, and we're seeing it play out yesterday and today. Their job is not to counter violent extremism, which is code for radical Islamic actions, Jihad. Their job is to make you immediately think racism when you see a violent act by a radical Islamist. They want the country to immediately think racism when they see an act by a radical Islamist. This is what it boils down to. This is what they're doing. And have you seen the tweets that one of Jay Johnson's newer appointees on the countering violent extremism had put out? You know, they're trying to have a good spin that when she said 9/11 changed the world for the good, that she meant it really some good things came out of it. That's not what she meant, and those are clear when she talks in racist terms about the white men and how if you think America's great, you're an idiot. And she goes on and on disparaging my country that I served 4 years in the military for and never saw combat. I still feel guilty because in '79, when we at Fort Benning were put on alert and President Carter decided not to do anything to the radical Islamists in Tehran, we're still losing Americans because we did nothing in '79. Nobody I knew at Fort Benning wanted to go die. Nobody was dying to go, but everyone I knew was willing to go and die for our country because an act of war had been committed. And so when I visited with leaders in the Middle East, sometimes we'll have cameras and we'll have media there, and they'll have the photo ops. But when it's private meetings, Muslim leaders will say, "What is wrong with you guys? You're getting advice from the Muslim Brotherhood. Do you not understand? Those are the Muslims that have been at war with you since 1979. What's wrong with you?" Our Muslim friends in Afghanistan, that I defied our embassy and our ambassador and the colonel in charge to go visit with when they wouldn't visit with them. These were part of the Northern Alliance that this president, this administration will not even allow in America. They defeated the Taliban for us within a matter of 4 or 5 months, and then we became occupiers. And this administration rejects the Northern Alliance fighters who were fighting for their country and also fought for ours in defeating the Taliban, and then we left them high and dry. They don't understand why we've been more friendly to the radical Islamists and allowed Muslim Brotherhood members, according to Egyptian publications when Morsi was president. They had a publication December, I believe it was 2012, but it was while Muslim Brotherhood was in charge of Egypt. And they had an article bragging that 6 of Obama's top advisors were Muslim Brotherhood. They mentioned Imam Majid, the former president of the Islamic Society of North America, which was a named co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial. They named El Biari from Texas, who Janet Napolitano put on the CVE and then promoted him to the advisory council, gave him a classified, gave him a secret classification. And even when I exposed to her that he had downloaded documents using his classification secret, and then he had tried to offer those 2 documents to national media, she sat there in a hearing and committed a crime and lied because first she said she didn't know anything about it, even though her chief had told the director of the Department of Public Safety in Texas the night before, because he called me and told me, "Hey, I just talked to her chief, and he says she's been fully advised about what El Biari did. She knows all about it." The next day she said, "I don't know what you're talking about." So either her chief lied or she sat there and committed a crime and lied. But she didn't know anything about it, but she said she would get to the bottom of it. When I asked her about it next time, she said that didn't happen. And do you know, there is a reporter who reported in his article that he talked to a member of the national media, and you would all recognize immediately, the Medium, who said that El Biari shopped the documents. "Here, I can furnish you these if you'll publish them and show these people to be Islamophobes." And fortunately, even though they're more liberal usually in what they do, they didn't take the documents. She said, "We investigated and that never happened." They never even talked to the reporter that reported it. They never talked to anybody. And when we know she lied and committed a crime again as Secretary of Homeland Security, she said, "We fully investigated. Since she's been gone, Judicial Watch was able to get documents from there. There was never an investigation." She lied about that too. So when I hear the president putting out that, look, all of my advisors are telling me the same thing here. Nobody is speaking up in opposition. Well, I guess not. You fired all of those that would tell you the truth. You fired the generals, the admirals, you fired the people in Homeland Security that were telling you the truth. And number one here today before you is one of the greatest American patriots I've ever met. And I've spent many, many, many hours with this man, and I know this man. We're talking about Phil Haney. And when he tried to lay those things out, they impaneled a grand jury to go after him, to destroy him. I tried to explain that to some of our leaders in the House. Look, you've seen what he has. You know how damaging this is to America, what they're doing in Homeland Security. We're going to have Americans continue to die. We're going to continue to have press conferences by this administration while explaining once again the radical Islamists that committed an act of hate somehow is not Islamists. Well, let me tell you, there's a guy that has a PhD that's the world-renowned expert on what is or is not Islam. We have a president that was taught a little bit about Islam in elementary school. Who do you think is the better expert? The guy, our president, that had a little bit of teaching in a Muslim school that he attended in Indonesia? Or the guy that has his PhD in Islamic studies from the University of Baghdad, who happens to be the leader of the Islamic State? I think he knows better than our president. Maybe we ought to listen to the head of ISIS about what is or is not Islam. And that's exactly what Phil Haney was trying to get across. A man with the brilliance and the intelligence and the acuity to look at things and instantly know, based on his knowledge of history, of Islam, of the Middle East, of all religions in the Middle East and in Africa, and his knowledge of the language, his knowledge of the players involved throughout history in radical Islam. He was able, it's amazing. I mean, no offense, Phil, but when I look at you, you don't scare me just from your looks. And I figure, this is a guy I can talk to because I don't have to worry about him. And guess what? The radical Islamists felt the same way. They would look at Phil Haney. They would not realize how brilliant this man is and how actually very, very clever he is, and how he could look at things and instantly be related to something else that he has seen, pull it all together, and then do, gosh, he is incredible when it comes to a work ethic. He won't stop until he proves or disproves something that he thinks may be happening. And then when he proved it and hundreds of people were verified to have radical Islamist terrorist ties, what do? They go after him with a grand jury. Why did they go after him with a grand jury? Because he filed a complaint with the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security. Why did he file that? Well, my friend Michelle mentioned that we had gotten him the ears of a number of our leaders in the House and Senate. And I want to call out my Chief of Staff, Connie Hare. She actually took him to each of those briefings. I attended some. She has been there and has been immensely helpful. He would make the briefings. Each time the members of Congress would sit there and go, oh my gosh, this guy is a treasure. This guy is something so valuable to the security of our country. We have got to protect him. And what would happen? They would talk to their staff members. And I know he mentions Nick Pallarino in his book, but it, not only Nick, but there are others who would have the ear of their member of Congress. you know, you look so good on television, which is something I don't have to worry about. I am what I am, and it ain't looking good on TV. But it's why I don't have the filter that so many in the House and Senate have. You know, you've heard the old saying, House members and senators get up every morning, look in the mirror, and see a future president. I know since the Nixon-Kennedy debates, that's when television became the most important in electing a president. That is also the line of demarcation. You can be bald and be president before that, but not in my lifetime. That will never happen. So I don't have that filter. You know, some guys, and this is, and some of the staffers know, you know, you can be president someday. But if you help this guy, I mean, you have a career that's taken off. But obviously the stuff he's got is so damning to this administration and the damage they've done to America in failing to protect us from radical Islam. If you start helping this guy, they're going to have to not just come after him, which they're going to do, they're going to come after you. And then there goes your great career, and who knows where it goes. Maybe you're a senator, maybe you're president, but it doesn't go anywhere if the Obama administration comes after you because you're helping him. Over and over, we had people in the House and Senate say, this guy's a treasure, he needs helping, but I'm really not going to be the one to be able to help him. And the last straw, he's told, go file a complaint with the Inspector General of Homeland Security. I was livid when I heard that he had been told that by some of my friends, not in my office. I called and said, Phil, you can't do this. You can't file a complaint with the IG. We have got to do this by protecting you in a congressional office. Let a senator or a congressman. Now, I had no chairmanship. I couldn't call a hearing. So I couldn't go more than just taking him to people, make sure he went to people that could call a hearing, could expose these things. And he said, Louis, I got no choice. I got nowhere else to go. Now, we had a man commit treason, and it was treason, when he exposed classified information that he had obtained while working for the government, and now he's in Russia. And I do not defend for a moment the treason that was committed by the way in which he brought things out. But as someone who has sent people to prison, even sentenced people to death, in sentencing is where you look at, are there any extenuating circumstances that mitigate for a lesser punishment? And I think in the case of the man that committed treason, he ought to be convicted of treason. And then in sentencing, the jury needs to see and hear the evidence and be asked the question, if you're in his situation and you know the Justice Department will come after you if you bring these things to them, and you know your own agency you're working for, they'll turn on you, they'll get a grand jury coming after you, you will be the target. You can't go to the CIA, you can't go to the Justice Department. As Phil found out, leaders in Congress, while Boehner was because this was all happening while Boehner was still the Speaker, we'd already seen what Boehner did. There were 5 of us that signed that letter. There were the 5 letters that went to the different departments. And Frank Gaffney was very helpful in getting the letters drafted. Michelle and I think, may have been the only ones that added stuff, changed stuff, and got it where we wanted those letters. There was nothing factually incorrect in any of those 5 different letters. And what happened? John McCain rushed to the Senate floor and condemned us without seeing the letters. Clearly, he didn't see the letter because he was making allegations that we didn't make. And I made the mistake of saying, I just wish all these numbnuts out there who, are criticizing our letters would read the letters before they criticized, and then the headlines, I called McCain a numbnuts, but anyway, and then it was another problem when I was asked if I had any regrets of saying numbnuts about McCain. Well, he, I guess, was part of the group that I singled out. But anyway, I did have to say it was unfair to use the term numb. I don't know if that was fair, but anyway.
Oh, got you a lot of points.
Yeah, so I walked back the numb part. But so McCain goes to the Senate floor and he makes these allegations. And then immediately John Boehner gets on board and he makes the same allegations without reading the letters. And then Mike Rogers, the head of our Intel committee, makes the same allegations. Folks, these guys were duped by people they believed that they shouldn't have. But we already knew the acting Inspector General at Homeland Security. He had already been called down for changing an Inspector General report to help cover for the administration once. Some of us knew what would be the outcome. And there were some of us, and I'm grateful to Tom Coburn had some of his staff go with us over to Homeland Security to get a briefing before the report was finished. And I was angry, but I was not surprised. Instead of pursuing the information that was deleted by people higher up than Phil Haney, they made it about whether or not Phil Haney was authorized to enter the material pointing out people who had terrorist ties, that this administration was either looking at giving them visas or working with them, one thing or another. Very important stuff they deleted. They totally disregarded the truth and the importance of protecting America, and they turned on Phil. From what we understand, he didn't have authority to enter that. No, after he entered all this information, then is when they started punishing him for trying to help America. He had information that would have been helpful on the Boston bombings. He had information he brought forth on Tablighi Jamaat that could have very well prevented the deaths in San Bernardino. This guy, he is amazing because I've been working with him for years. He's an American treasure. And on one occasion, after he'd been thrown to the dogs, no, just file a complaint with the Inspector General. I went to one of our members that had authority of subpoena power that I didn't have, or I would have issued a subpoena myself. He said, why don't you issue a subpoena to Phil for all those documents that he's got, the thousands he has copies of? And he said, well, what are you getting at? I said, well, it will do two things. Number one, it will protect the documents. And number two, under the law, he will be allowed to have the government hire a lawyer. And the question, because he couldn't afford a lawyer, he's given his life for his country, and that includes the money he could have obviously made when you realize how intelligent he is if he had not worked for the government. And the question I was asked was, why would he need a lawyer? Because the administration is going to come after him. The same reason you wouldn't protect him here in Congress is the reason he needs a lawyer. And did he need a lawyer? And I am grateful to Judicial Watch, because when the grand jury started coming after him, he needed a lawyer. And he couldn't afford a lawyer, and that's what they do. You know, they try to bankrupt you. You've got no hope, nowhere to turn. Congress doesn't help you. The Justice Department's not only not helping you, they're coming after you. They're going to prosecute you because you could hurt the administration with the information you have. But we had to get a statement from ethics, on what could be done. But Judicial Watch stepped up and they helped. And he had a lawyer. And because he has been squeaky clean his whole life, even though they put him through hell, they put his poor wife through hell, she ends up in the hospital, they don't care. Because he could hurt the administration because he's trying to protect America. So they couldn't find anything. They made a big deal in front of in front of a bunch of his coworkers of taking his gun away and putting him in basically a closet. And the message from this administration was very clear. You try to stand up and protect this country against radical Islam, this is your career. Do you want to be humiliated in front of your coworkers, have your weapon taken away? That's a devastating thing in front of your coworkers. Have your credentials crushed. You can't even get on the internet anymore. This is an American icon. He's an American hero. And he was crucified by this administration because they can't afford to have somebody stand up and speak the truth. So anyway, I like the director of the FBI, Comey, think he's an honorable man, but at our hearing in judiciary, he made a big splash on YouTube when I was asking him about, you didn't even go to the mosque where the Tsarnaevs went. Oh, yeah, they explained. They did investigate. They asked Tsarnaev, and he said he wasn't a terrorist. And they asked his mother, oh, he's a good boy. He's not a terrorist. So they go the other way. And Russia warned us twice. You don't get it. This guy's radicalized. He's going to kill people. But because this administration has blinded our intelligence, our homeland security, of our ability to see our enemies, they couldn't see clearly he had been radicalized. Now, Michelle Bachmann and I, Lynn Westmoreland came for part of it. Michelle and I don't know if she mentioned, but she and I met with the FBI. It was ridiculous because they classified the documents they had purged from the FBI training materials. But we were going through, there were some things like cartoons, some that was pretty inane. Okay, it doesn't really matter. But when you take things out of your briefing that let FBI agents understand what a radical Islamist believes, then you are damning our country to be hit over and over with these type of terrorist attacks. We have incredible FBI agents. Had lunch, with dinner with one last night. I think the world of them. I know tons of FBI agents. I just love them, think the world of them. They're good people. But they've not been properly trained in this administration. And those that have been properly trained in prior administrations, they have seen what's happened in Justice Department and Homeland Security. If somebody stands up and says, this guy's a radical Islamist, he has ties to this guy who's a radical Islamist, and they all have ties to this mosque, well, we saw how bad the misinformation in education has become, even with our own FBI director, when I put that to Mueller, and he said, we did go to those mosques. And I didn't hear it when he said it. My staff told me when I got back, we replayed it, and then I heard it. He said, in our outreach program. In their outreach program, they never went and asked a single person at the Muslim mosque in Boston, what do you know about Tsarnaev? What's he reading these days? As Phil could tell him if they'd let him instruct. He's instructed me. He's educated me as best anybody could, and that's not easy. But if you find somebody that's looking to bligha Jamaat and is beginning to memorize the Quran with the goal of memorizing the entire Quran, you got a potential problem. Now they've moved into that area which you're hearing people talk about after Americans are killed. Well, it did seem like he was getting more religious, right? I wish they had allowed you to be educated on what to look for. Our FBI agents don't know. I bet most of our FBI agents, even if they knew, they couldn't tell you because they'd have their gun taken away. Osama bin Laden said, you know, a big factor in his radicalization was the Muslim Brotherhood martyr Qutb, Q-U-T-B, his booklet Milestones. It's been used to radicalize a lot. And if you went online, you would find that Mr. El-Biari, that Janet Napolitano loved and protected, he bragged about what a great book that was and recommended it to other Muslims. It's the thing that Osama bin Laden said was really helpful in radicalizing him. But because our people in Homeland Security and our people in justice have been not improperly educated, they don't know what Phil Haney knows. They don't know what to look for. They don't know what authors in Islam to ask about at the mosque. So I didn't hear him say in our outreach program, but I knew he said we had been to the mosque. I said, did you even know who founded that mosque in Boston? Did you know that Al-Moody founded the Islamic Society of Boston that founded the mosque? And some of you know Al-Moody's doing, I think, 23 years in prison for supporting terrorism. And even our own Justice Department and intelligence weren't the ones. I always thought, oh, well, the FBI got him. No, the information, I'm told by some people with Justice Department, actually their tip-off came from the British. They said, this guy's supporting terrorism. You're letting him in and out. He advised the Clinton administration. He helped identify Muslims for the Clinton administration to hire and put in office. I've been asking the question, who was it that placed Huma Abedin, or Huma Weiner, who placed her as the intern with Hillary Clinton? Who did that? Was it Al-Moody? I can't find anybody that knows. Or if they know, they won't say. Who placed her with Hillary Clinton? And now she is not just a past acquaintance. I mean, she's still a top advisor for Hillary Clinton. So maybe, I don't know who it was. I'm just wondering who made that placement. Because we know he helped the Clinton administration and the Bush administration until they finally arrested him out at Dulles Airport when he came in. We know that he was helping people find Muslims that would be good helps as chaplains in the military, chaplains in prison. Have y'all heard about how people are being radicalized in prison? Okay, well, he helped find just the right Muslim for our prison systems. We got big trouble, and Phil Haney is an American hero. And that's why, you know, I came busting out here because I love this guy. He put his, I love Michelle. She said, he risked his career. No, he lost his career by standing up for what? He didn't just risk it. He lost it while trying to protect our country. So every time you hear the letters CVE, don't be thinking countering violent extremism. What you need to understand is, oh, that's the group in this administration that wants us to think racism every time we see an act of war by a radical Islamist. Because that's who they are, that's what they're doing. And I thought, well, it was a good thing. They wouldn't let El-Biari go. They kept him on, kept defending him. And then after he tweeted out that, look, and it was after, I think, Americans were killed in the Middle East. He said, look, you know, the international caliphate's inevitable and Americans need to get used to it. Well, finally, that was enough, not to fire him, but to let him go ahead and retire at the end of this term. And now we've got a lady named Alawa, who articled this week pointing out a bunch of her tweets. she says 9/11 changed the world for good, well, then that's being she meant it as how it's helped America. No, look at her tweets, her other tweets. It makes very clear. She is a racist to the bone. She hates white people, especially white men. She is a bigot when it comes to gender. She's a racist when it comes to Caucasian. And she hates America. And she says, oh, yeah, 9/11, that's when all these idiots can put out their flags and have, this is a woman that is advising Homeland Security now. But the good news is she's where Ella Biari started before he was promoted to being on the advisory council. You start out CVE, and if you do a good job, they move you to advisory. She's on the CVE right now, and so I guess next, because she hates Caucasians and men, she'll probably be promoted pretty quickly. Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
I do actually, and I also have a statement. I want to say to you, I want to say to everyone who ever felt afraid to be called a racist, be not afraid. Because if it means doing something about this issue, be called a racist, then stand firm, stand tall, and be a racist, if that's what it is.
God bless you. Isn't that awesome? Thank you.
They are using the issue of race. This United States, yes, we know, we have had our racial issue, but then let it be between the races in America. They will not use civil rights. They will not use the history to further their goal. So anybody afraid to be called that strong and firm. And that's all I have to say.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Well, obviously, the people up here in front of you are not afraid of being called racist, but
They want people to be afraid.
yes.
And why should we be afraid? So that
Yeah.
we can take over.
Well, I'll leave you with the one comment that it's an old adage here in Washington, D.C., and I will commend it to you, though I'm a Christian. I think there's a lot to be said for the wisdom of this statement, that in Washington, D.C., no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough to catch up. Thank y'all very much.
Congressman, thank you.
As the fates would have it, he was working. He was working in Atlanta Hartsfield. And I explained what we had, the details that we had, as much as what I had by telephone. I said, look, I'm going to put you in touch with my officer in charge, and he's going to give you everything that we have. And they went back and forth, and then I got back to my officer in charge, and I said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to follow the line of questioning that Philip presents to you, and we're going to see where it takes us. And I think where it's going to take us is individuals associated with individuals or organizations that are terrorist-oriented, and then we're going to do deep board. I checked with FBI, or I had my OIC check with FBI, and he came back and said, FBI agrees with what we're doing. They like the line of questioning. The only thing they ask we do is provide them with literally everything we come up with. And essentially that's what happened. The last thing I want to present. You were at home. Oh, I was at home. At 05, it's Sunday. 0500. I worked 24/7. I worked a lot of 7 days a week. 0400, especially if somebody important, like a senator or a congressman was coming in. I'd go there myself and meet him or her. Anyway, the only thing I want to leave you with is, why were the 5 Muslim clerics stopped in the first place? Why? Because we've been receiving intel on radicalization taking place in mosques for more than 10 years. Islamic clerics, foreign Islamic clerics, have been infiltrating mosques, recruiting young Muslims, and promoting jihad and terrorist actions. 2003, 2004, I think it's 2003, I attended a joint agency task force meeting in my home state. I used to go to quarterly meetings where 4 or 5 American Islamic imams were ringing alarm bells about U.S. mosques being infiltrated by foreign fundamentalist clerics who were radicalizing young male U.S. Muslims. They were pitching terrorist tactics and offering travel for foreign training. The American imams were banned from attending these fundamentalist type meetings. They had to covertly listen to what was going on inside. And in a lot of cases, they were forced out. This is what they're telling us. They were forced out of their mosques. One example they gave at this meeting was of the terrorist, the extremist tactics that were being pitched around at these meetings was planting explosive devices in U.S. and Western European city subway systems. This meeting took place exactly, or just about, 2 months prior to the Madrid subway bombings. So we've known about this for 10 years. FBI, other investigative agencies, I'm sure they're doing the best they can. But they need a man like Mr. Haney to connect the dots. And they need an agency like Customs and Border Protection to lay out the scheme of things once they come in to the country and then move on. Listen, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Philip for inviting me, and I wish you the best. And thank you.
Anyway, for the benefit of Attorney Schmitz, who was not here earlier, I just want to reintroduce him as former Inspector General for the Department of Defense. And he currently serves as a foreign policy advisor for Donald Trump's campaign.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here to support Phil Haney. He is a great American. I'm not here on behalf of the campaign, but I'm here as Philip's former pro bono attorney. I found out about what Phil was going through, and particularly when he was trying to make a complaint to an inspector general under pretty precarious circumstances, and it was one of those opportunities in life where I just couldn't say no. So I just want to leave you with 2 points, and I'd be glad to answer any questions about kind of the Inspector General angle that Phil endured. But a couple points. I've actually written a book called The Inspector General Handbook. When I was the DoD IG, there was no such book, and a lot of people would just scratch their head and said, "What in the world is an Inspector General?" So I'm pretty familiar with what IGs do. I ran the largest, most expansive organization in the world for almost 4 years during 2 wars, and it wasn't fun. I had to deal with a lot of ugly stuff, a lot of whistleblower reprisal, a lot of just bad behavior that had to be illuminated, and just to maintain good order and discipline within the Department of Defense. Philip Haney personifies one of my favorite sayings that I learned over many years in the Inspector General business. And I try to teach not only my employees but my children this. And I think Philip will remember me telling him this when I first kind of heard his story. Number one, it's not easy being a whistleblower. In fact, it's hard and it's painful. But I think Philip Haney personifies the old adage that anything is possible by the grace of God and a few Marines. You know. The one final point I just want to make, which I think is an important point to make, and as an Inspector General, I ran into this type of political correctness in a very ugly way. I was actually asked by members of Congress to investigate potential al-Qaeda infiltration into the American Chaplain Corps. And this was came to light when a chaplain by the name of Yi was caught down in Guantanamo Bay, and there were allegations that he was somehow complicit with the enemy. And then they found a bunch of kiddie porn on his laptop, and sort of the investigation went away. And anyway, members of Congress rightly came to me and said, you know, Mr. Schmitz, we need you to take a look at the Chaplain Corps and make sure that we don't have enemies sneaking into our DoD infrastructure through the Chaplain Corps. And I did a pretty thorough review of the process of vetting chaplains. And I spoke with, you know, the head Catholic chaplains, the head Protestant chaplains, the head Jewish chaplains. We didn't have very many Muslim chaplains at the time. There really wasn't a head, so I didn't have anyone to speak with. But I came up with a pretty common sense test at the time and presented this test to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, who was in charge of supervising all of the ecclesiastical endorsing agents, including the Muslim ecclesiastical endorsing agents. To become a chaplain in the military, you have to essentially be presented and vouched for by your church or synagogue or mosque. And we had some pretty serious issues with one of the Muslim endorsing agencies. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the founder of one of the Muslim ecclesiastical endorsing agencies was none other than Abdurrahman Al-Amoudi, who Congressman Louis Gohmert mentioned was subsequently convicted and sentenced to 23 years in prison for being a bagman for a hit job in the Middle East. And he was sentenced to 23 years, but I double-checked on my handy iPhone while Congressman Gohmert was explaining the basic facts. But in 2011, the Obama administration successfully got his sentence reduced by 6 years. So by my count, he was convicted, I think. His plea bargain, I think, was in 2004. Plus 23 is 27, right? Minus 6 is 21, and probably for a good time, he's probably ready to get out. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the current term you're going to see some kind of a pardon. I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah. So anyway, my hat's off, by the way. I didn't know Louis was back in. There are very few. Did you hear what I said about the grace of God and a few Marines? Louis is one of the very courageous members of Congress that I would consider one of those Marines. But anyway, the one final thing I'd just like to say with regard to this investigation or review that I did of all of the chaplain endorsing agencies in the Pentagon at the time, I had about 15 or 20 recommendations on how to essentially screen better all of our chaplains. I mean, it wasn't just Chaplain Yi that was causing concern. There were even some Catholic priests that were doing bad things, and Protestants, and even Jewish. I mean, look, chaplains are humans. One thing you learn as an inspector general, you know, human nature doesn't change. And so one of my recommendations to the kind of a conference room full of personnel specialists was, before we accepted an endorsement of any chaplain, ecclesiastical endorsing agent, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, Wigan, whatever, we ought to just do a quick national agency check just to make sure that, you know, the leaders or that organization itself wasn't about to be busted by the FBI. And this is no exaggeration. Some of the lawyers in the room, it was as if The Exorcist said the name Jesus Christ. Their heads started to spin. And a couple weeks later, I got a, quote, non-concurrence, is what they call it, not from any one lawyer in the Pentagon, but from the impersonal office of the General Counsel, non-concurring in my recommendation that we simply do a national agency check on the endorsing agency before we accept the endorsement for any chaplain. I was so outraged, and by the way, I used to teach First Amendment law, advanced constitutional law at Georgetown University before I became the IG as an adjunct professor. And I was virtually certain that my recommendation would pass muster under anybody's First Amendment test. It was absolutely neutral. It was designed for a very narrow purpose. But the General Counsel's Office of the Department of Defense, without anybody putting a personal name on it, non-concurred. And as an Inspector General, when you do these type of reviews, you just make your recommendations. You don't have any authority other than to shed light on facts and make recommendations. But a few years later, when Fort Hood happened and a Muslim chaplain assistant by the name of Nidal Hassan killed a number of American soldiers on an army base, when I found out that there was a chaplain assistant who was the subject, or was the killer, all I could think of, and I won't use the adjective, but it began with an F, and it modified the term lawyers. And that's all I could think about. And I wrote a 5-page letter to Chairman Dianne Feinstein, who was one of the members of Congress that asked me to do the chaplain review, as I recall. And I just felt morally obligated to send this letter and say, you know, I got to tell you, I recommended a very simple test, and the lawyers rejected it in the Pentagon. And the moral of the story is political correctness kills. And I'm gonna finish, and I'll just come back to compliment Philip Haney. He's a very, very courageous, very smart, and very dedicated man. I had the privilege of meeting his family. And, you know, at the end of all of our days, we all have to meet our maker and account for our talents. And I don't think Philip Haney, as painful as everything he's been through, I don't think he's going to have any problem accounting for his talents. Thank you very much.
At this juncture, we're going to basically progress into a Q&A session.